As we get closer to the World Series and a 2023 World Series club being crowned, we get nearer to understanding the futures of Josh Bell, Jorge Soler. Equally, the Marlins will start to have to work through their arbitration class, which is sizable. Are there any non-tender candidates heading into 2024? Tons to get into. This is Locked On Marlins.
You are Locked On Marlins, your daily podcast on the Miami Marlins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings from England and welcome to Locked On Marlins. This is your daily Marlins podcast. I'm your host, Peter Pratt. Hit me up, of course, at Miami Marlins _UK. If you are listening to the pod, and I'm sure you still are, but hit subscribe and leave a review. Much appreciated, guys. This is your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Marlins your first listen of the day. It's still October. We're still podcasting, baby. And there's still baseball being played. Not so much for the Marlins, but there's still baseball. The ALCS is about to start this evening as well. Dolphins football is just about kicked off as well. Recording this just after 6 p.m. UK time on Sunday the 15th. Firstly, there is a YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit subscribe over there too. It's also called Locked On Marlins, so hit subscribe and join me over there. And firstly, I have to call out, apologies. There's been a pause in the action the past few days. For those that follow me on Twitter would have seen I was celebrating, at a wedding, celebrating not my own wedding or marriage, but my sister got married on Friday. So that was a sizable affair, no doubt. It was boozy. Prosecco was overflowing, I would describe it as. The waiter that was looking after our table, this one guy in particular, he was just everywhere. He was just pouring Prosecco. And I'd turn my head for 1 second, he'd be back in pouring it. It was always to the brim. I couldn't get to the bottom of a glass. That sums it up. It's that kind of event. Dance floor was open. I tore it up. Not gonna lie, Billie Jean, I absolutely nailed it. I think I did anyway. Not that I can remember it. But anyway, enough of that. Apologies, guys. There's been a couple of days slippage here with episodes. So it's a Sunday. I'm still feeling a touch hungover, but it's time for an episode. It's time to start getting into some of the main off-season topics. Firstly, the Phils have made their way through to the NLCS. We'll look forward to seeing that matchup against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Not sure if that busted everyone's brackets. Probably it did. The Diamondbacks taking down the Dodgers pretty comfortably, actually. And the Phillies actually well outplayed the Bravos, too. So a couple of big 100-win clubs that had the buys, both of them fall in the NLDS. And listen, the Phils at home, as we saw, from a Marlins perspective, we saw it up close and personal. That is one hell of a tough environment. And they're playing good ball right now, the Phils. They're pitching well. For me, it all came back to that game one, that Ranger Suarez start against Spencer Strider. And for the Phils to win that one, that put them just straight in the driving seat for that one. The Bravos never got going in the whole series. But the Phils advanced, and they deserved it. That's the way it comes down to at the end of the day. The Diamondbacks equally, they deserved it. Both the Braves and Dodgers offenses both went stone cold through these series. A lot of people are asking the question around the bye and how that impacts the offensive guys in particular. I think there's probably a degree of truth to that in many ways. So it's going to be interesting to see how those clubs adapt moving forwards, because the Braves tried to do something different this year. Getting these sim games going. Did that not quite work? Do they need to up the intensity? How do they solve this riddle? But then you look over historically at the Astros, and the Astros in that situation just blew everyone away. So is it just small sample size? Is it just you didn't play well? Or is there something to it with these offenses going cold and these, seeded clubs not being able to get out the blocks quick in the NL or ALDS? Interesting to watch. But, what that does start to signal as we edge nearer to the World Series in a couple of weeks' time, we'll know who the champ is. The one thing to call out on that and why it's important to the Marlins is once the World Series has ended, that triggers a few things typically. Players become free agents. Joey Wendell's on that list. The Marlins going to look to extend Joey Wendell? I don't think so. Um, you know, much as he was a good clubhouse guy, it's fair to say his time in Miami is probably over, which is, I'm interested to see Joey Wendell, what kind of contract he does garner. For me, Joey Wendell will probably have to go down a Garrett Hampson route. We're going to talk about Hampson in this episode, but it's probably going to be down that type of route for Wendell. Like, it was that poor, his spell in Miami, that I'm not sure that anyone's going to be looking to commit any significant years or money towards Wendell. He's going to have to work his way back up. It's a big fall for grace for Joey Wendell. But this isn't all about Wendell. Free agents will become free agents as soon as the World Series is completed. The interesting bit for the Marlins specifically is that the options, be it team or player options or opt-outs or however you want to phrase it, they have to make that decision within 5 days of the World Series. And there's two very significant players for the Marlins, Jorge Soler and Josh Bell. I think we all know, and it's pretty clear that Jorge Soler will be opting out. The interesting bit on him specifically is, well, clearly the Marlins have an option to try to extend him. They've had that option to negotiate. I'm not sure I've heard that that's actually been taking place, so we'll see. But the Marlins also do have the opportunity to then submit a qualifying offer to Jorge Soler if indeed he does opt out, which we expect him to. And so that is a very interesting one for Soler, in my opinion anyway, where he may look and think, okay, $20 million 1-year deal in Miami. I like it here. Do I want to take that? Maybe, maybe not. I think his performance this year, he'd be looking for a multi-year deal, clearly. He'd expect to get a multi-year deal. I'm interested to see what kind of range, what kind of range it goes. It feels like the free agent class this year is relatively limited. And I guess from his perspective, he'd probably looking around and thinking, there's maybe what, a 3-year 50, 3-year 60 on the table. It's probably what Jorge Soler's thinking. So with that being said, it's probably going to price the Marlins out of it, perhaps. But submitting a qualifying offer, him turning it down, then you then get some compensation back from a draft perspective. If indeed he does look to decline that offer, I think the level of compensation links to the size of the contract that indeed he goes on to sign. So, from a Marlins perspective, if he does reject the offer, I think it's in their interest for Soler to absolutely fleece someone, lock down a huge deal. So we'll see. Soler, we know what will happen in terms of the opt-out. So within a couple of days, that will formally happen. What then happens is a bit of a domino effect, as I've explained. Josh Bell is a different kettle of fish, in my opinion. So the $16.5 million for Josh Bell, I think, is a sizable number to turn down. Clearly, he ended the season really well with the Marlins. It didn't really work out for him in Cleveland. But, in Miami, he came back alive, back in the NL East, came back alive. $16.5 million feels like a lot of money to turn down. My gut feel with Josh Bell is that he will opt into this deal. He will stay in and he will have his final year. We also shouldn't rule out the Marlins maybe doing something more creative. Because I think more generally with the Marlins at this point, they don't have a ton of money coming off the books. And as we're going to talk about for the main chunk of this episode, once you get the first ad done, is this team, the arbitration class is sizable and it's increasingly more expensive. And frankly, the players where it's increasing, they're must have in many ways. So the roster and the spend on the roster is going to increase more generally anyway. So I do wonder if the Marlins and Josh Bell, maybe they look to do something creative. If indeed he wants to commit, maybe they can try to flatten out that 16.5 number. Maybe enter into a multi-year or something similar to maybe Jorge Soler's deal. I don't know. I'm intrigued to see if they try to get creative with that and try to bring down the 16, flatten it a touch, get an extra year of commitment maybe from Bell. Feels like there could be a win-win situation in there, perhaps, particularly if he likes the environment. And from what we saw, Bell, Berger, Jazz, it felt like there was like a real nice nucleus there of those guys. When if the team's playing well, he likes the environment, then why not? Why not? We're going to talk about the arbitration class now, as well as potential non-tender candidates. Like, of any of these guys that the Marlins can engage and work through from an arbitration perspective, they also clearly have the option to non-tender someone and effectively releasing them and not agreeing a contract extension. Is there any of those guys that we look back to last year? We're getting into, like, what was it? Alfaro. I think he was one of the guys. Brinson, maybe a couple of years back. Like, we've kind of been through this before, but let's look at this year's crop. But before we do that, guys, it's time to let you know about our good friends over at Sleeper. Yes, sir. So, guys, the MLB playoffs, they are here, which means the clock is ticking on your chance to 100 times your cash on daily fantasy baseball. Baseball has never been more exciting than it is now with studs like Acuna, Betts, and Ohtani. None of them in the postseason anymore, by the way. Pick more or less on stats for these stars, like home runs, hits, strikeouts, and more for up to 100 times payout on Sleeper. Get your picks right, and you could win big time. Yes, sir. That sounds good to me as well. So here's what you need to do. Not if you. Here's what you need to do. You need to use this promo code, and this promo code is all one word, and it is all in caps, baby, and it's locked on. And you'll get up to $100 matched on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. Okay, guys, you're back in the action with me, Peter Pratt, on Sunday, the 15th of October, a Sunday episode after a few episodes missed for a family wedding earlier in the week. Let's talk arbitration now, guys, because when I looked at this, I thought, wow, this is a big class. Big class. And this is it. Like, for a team like the Marlins that are kind of draft and develop, let's call them. Trade and develop, maybe, is the better phrase. For this type of club, they're always going to have a sizable arbitration class. They're looking to use cheaper talent and, develop them and see progression through. So this is kind of like what you'd expect for a club like the Marlins. They have 13 guys on the roster that are arbitration eligible. So let's get into them. There's a few standouts. And I do think the standouts do kind of lean into topics around extensions or non-tenders, actually. So let's start with Tanner Scott. The reason I want to start with Tanner Scott is he's in his final year of arbitration now. So this is going to be the final year of club control. As I mentioned on the pod a few days ago, earlier last week, I'm intrigued about Tanner Scott. I'm intrigued because the projection is like in and around 6 million, a touch under perhaps for Tanner Scott. I mean, he was one of the best relievers in the game in 23. We can't get away from that. His value was incredible. Here's what we have to say about relievers. The volatility. We know the drill. Tanner Scott in 22, you wouldn't trust him in any kind of leverage spot. In 23, you trust him in the biggest of spots. In 24, which Tanner Scott are you going to get? Which one will you get? Who knows? That's the volatility of the reliever market, let's say. 6 million for the Marlins feels sizable, very sizable, I would say, for a reliever. So let's kind of call that out. Again, I do wonder Tanner Scott, clearly the Marlins want to retain him. He's in his final year. That then brings into, and the Marlins seem to do this pretty regularly, they look to move relievers when they're entering their final year, be it like heading into the season, at the deadline, etc. So I wouldn't rule out Tanner Scott being traded, to be honest with you. Only purely because he'd be earning a relatively high salary in the grand scheme for the Marlins. His trade value is at the highest it could possibly be right now. And with only 1 year of control remaining, now's the time to extract some significant value. Not to say that I would trade Tanner Scott. I'm absolutely not suggesting that they should do that. But a club like the Marlins, they always need to be considering every option. And whilst the bullpen was the strength of the club in 2023. We can't get away from that. We look at nails. How many times did we say nails? We said it like every other game. The bullpen was incredible. That's how they won so many one-run games. So to subtract from the bullpen doesn't seem to make a ton of sense. But what I have seen from Kim and her ability to do this is to piece together bullpens in such an effective way. Really effective way. So I'm not advocating it by any stretch. But Tanner Scott's value, I don't think will ever be higher than this offseason. So the Marlins should consider it. They have holes they need to fill, and they need to fill them, and these holes sit in starting pitching, potentially, at shortstop, corner outfield, DH potentially. Like there's a few holes that have appeared here for the Marlins. And so, could the Marlins do without another lefty reliever, albeit a very good one in 23? Could they do without a lefty reliever? They probably could if the deal was right. On the flip side of this with Tanner Scott, thinking about it from a retention perspective, is could there be an extension? Could there be a multi-year agreement here for the Marlins and Tanner Scott? I think if they were going to do that, they would probably want to de-risk it in the long-term extensions for relievers because of the volatility they bring, is often a dangerous game. So we'll see how this plays out with Tanner Scott. I think all options are on the table, which makes it one of the most intriguing situations to monitor here. Extensions in play. A trade is in play. A simple arbitration is in play, and they just find a number. Everything's in play with Tanner Scott. Let's talk about Luis Arias, because Luis Arias is projected at over 10 million. It's his second year of arbitration, so he has 2 more years of control. He's projected at over 10 million, near 11 million for Luis Arias. In 2023, Luis Arias' number, let's check what that was. I think it was 6.1. 6.1 mil for Arias. So he's looking to get almost like a 5 million pay rise for Luis Arias. He absolutely deserves it, by the way. I'm not questioning that at all. He's one of the best hitters in the game. One of the best pure contact hitters maybe there's ever been. And it's not hyperbole to say that. Back-to-back batting champs in both divisions. Stunning. The question is, and it's the same question, and the question that, listen, the optics around this one are interesting because the Marlins have made that trade with Pablo Lopez for Luis Arias, and they will forevermore be compared. Pablito pitching like a stud in the postseason. Obviously, Arias, his body broke down at the back end. Like he was really struggling with his ankle, etc. But, both of them had stunning seasons. This is such a high-profile trade, and Arias just looks so important to everything the Marlins are looking to do with their offense. Like Kim went out and wanted this contact-orientated approach, and she's been proven right. She's been proven right. And with that, you now have the opportunity to try to extend what has been one of the best hitters in the game. And the thing is with Arias, I feel like the skill set will age really well. I feel like, okay, even, some of the guys you look at and you go, right, speed, et cetera, this profile, you think there's a pretty high degree of risk in that. I look at Arias and I just see limited amounts of risk. So I think from a Marlins perspective, an extension could be really intriguing here. And because of such a high-profile trade, it makes sense for Luis Arias. I'm not sure if it gets done this year, if it gets done the year after, but it feels like, they got what they wanted out of Luis Arias. They got more than what they wanted probably or expected from Luis Arias heading into 23. He's earned it. The number's only going up. It's going to be, 10 million this year. Next year, arbitration, 15 million? It feels like a really good time to lock in and commit to each other. So wait to see on that one. I want to talk about Jacob Stallings. He's also on this list. Jacob Stallings. He was earning just over 3 million last year. He's projected to make maybe 3.5. Final year of arbitration for Jacob Stallings. Very intriguing name, I think, considering the price tag. How do you feel about Jacob Stallings? Would you DFA? No, non-tender Jacob Stallings? Do you think he deserves $3.5 million? Can he deliver that kind of value? Ooh, this is a tough one. This is probably going to be the toughest decision that the Marlins actually have to make in Jacob Stallings. They've talked about the catcher position. Kim spoke about the catcher position in and around the deadline and calling out that it was hard to make any moves during that period for catchers. And actually, the impact of changing the catcher really impacts your staff too. Now that we're in a different spot in the offseason, they have a bit more flexibility, I think, to go in a different direction if indeed they want to go in a different direction. The question is how do they feel about Stallings? The funny thing is Jacob Stallings was seen as pretty much like Sandy Alcantara's personal catcher. Caught Sandy great in 22. Obviously, Sandy's going to be missing for 24. Does that impact Jacob Stallings? Does it? I think we have to look at the overall production of Stallings and think, in the cold light of day, he's not worth $3.5 million or $4 million. I don't think he is. And, we've just seen his pay rise is going to go up like $5 million. Can you move on from Stallings and kind of help cover the cost of Arias? Would that be better spent? And you go in a different direction at catcher. The Marlins need to do something different at catcher. They are a pitching and defense club theoretically. But I think they do need to shake it up a touch at catcher. Like Stallings and Fortes, Iron Men last year, by the way. I don't think either of them went to the IL at all. So that was impressive. Their longevity, their stamina, impressive. But I'm just getting the sense that the Marlins are going to explore different options. And they've got a budget challenge here where some of their main studs are getting more expensive. Jacob Stallings isn't getting a touch more expensive because his performance doesn't warrant that effectively. But nevertheless, $3.5-4 million, I think, could be used elsewhere, and they could potentially go in a different direction at the catcher spot. So I'm gonna predict that Jacob Stallings is non-tendered by the Marlins heading into the 24 season. Let's do the final ad, and then we'll be back to carry on talking about a few other guys that equally are intriguing. Like I said, this is a deep class. This might even be a 2-episoder. But this episode is also brought to you by FanDuel. And October baseball is back. And you can make your postseason debut with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Join FanDuel today and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to create your new account. Then you can get in on the action from the first pitch until the final out. Bet on everything from strikeouts to home runs to who will win the game. And if you don't want to wait the whole game to get that dub, predict what will happen in the next at-bat with quick bets. Love that one. So head on over to FanDuel.com/lockedon right now. Step up to the plate this postseason with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. All right, guys, you are back here with me, Peter Pratt, on Sunday, the 15th of October. We are talking arbitration. We are talking potential extensions for Tanner Scott. Also potential trades. We are talking potential extensions for Luis Arias. We are talking about a potential non-tender situation for Jacob Stallings. Let's talk about a few other guys that I think decisions or considerations will need to be made. So Garrett Hampson, the Marlins have an extra year of control on Hampson. He's entering his final year of arbitration. He's projected at 1.3, 1.4 million for Garrett Hampson. Considering what type of season that Hampson had and the versatility, it's a no-brainer for me on Garrett Hampson. Lock him in. The Marlins love these utility guys. They absolutely love it. I would say on Hampson, without looking, only because it just popped into my head, I do believe that his minor league options are now fully consumed. And so, if you recall, during 2023, Hampson started in AAA, came up, did his bit, went back down, came back up, and actually was a important cog for the Marlins. They won't have that opportunity so much in 24. So, granted, Hampson, if it doesn't work out at 1.3, 1.4 million, no problem. You could just DFA him or look to trade him at a later date. But frankly, his versatility was extremely useful for the Marlins. The Marlins also have JT Chargois, who's projected to earn 1.2 million. Chargois, I would say, had a bit of an underwhelming year for the Marlins. I would say that there's a potential that the Marlins look to go in a different direction on this one. However, at 1.2 million, relatively low cost, and a righty. The Marlins, absolutely loaded up in the pen with lefties. My gut feel is that Chargois will be offered a contract, and they'll find a way to move forward in arbitration. AJ Park entering arbitration for the first time. AJ Park, and AJ Park projected to make $1.8 million. It's a no-brainer. They'll be tendering him a deal. Stephen Okert projected to make $1.2 million. Okert is a very interesting one as well, in my opinion. In the lefty guy, abundance of lefties. Do they need another lefty? But just for me with Okert, I felt like he dropped off quite significantly at the back end of the year. Was it overusage? Was it roll? Was it just, what was it with Okert? But I feel like as we entered the postseason, we're in that kind of final run. He was using a lot of leverage spots. Everyone was using leverage spots because there was just so much leverage. The season was on the line like every day. I feel like Okert, a lot of confidence was lost around him. Marlins Twitter, the pulse, the finger on the pulse there was like, Okert's not in a good spot. It's been a success story overall with Okert. I just feel like he had a bit of a bad run, so I'd be surprised if the Marlins end up non-tendering him, particularly when it's only like just over $1 million. And all those extra years of control for a lefty guy. Be surprised. I wouldn't be shocked, though, if there was a trade involving Stephen Okert, to be honest with you. Trevor Rogers, another lefty. Clearly for the Marlins, he projected like $1.5 million for Trevor Rogers. If you have healthy Trevor Rogers, then you're seeing that value back. There's a lot of questions about Trevor Rogers heading into this season. I'm going to spend time on this podcast talking about that. I don't think there's any question that Trevor will be non-tendered or anything along those lines. So we can move on that, and we'll talk about Trevor at a later time. Jazz Chisholm Jr. Jazz projected to earn just under $3 million. This one, again, is an intriguing one. Got into it earlier in the week with Branson. We're talking about Jazz, potential extensions, etc. Oh, boy, this is an intriguing one because I feel like, Jazz has had this toe surgery. The toe was obviously bothering him, but I feel like there's a situation here, and we've said this for quite a few years in a row with Jazz, that playing elite level center field defense plus the offensive production that we know is there, like 30-30 season is absolutely, in his grasp if he wants it and he's healthy. You're talking about one of the best and most valuable players in the game at this point. So the Marlins really have to consider the approach with Jazz. The challenge with Jazz is he believes he is one of the best players in the game when he's fully out, healthy and out there. And so there may be a mismatch on this one. I get the sense that Jazz likes being in Miami, but I also get the sense that, he likes the big lights elsewhere too. Granted, he didn't perform amazingly in that, the two games of Philadelphia. But overall, Jazz knows what it looks and feels like outside of Miami, and that could be very intriguing for him as well. So I think that is interesting. Jonathan Davis. This is another interesting name, in my opinion, Jonathan Davis. He's projected at, just over the league minimum, really, $800,000. Jonathan Davis. For me, this is intriguing. One that I think the Marlins absolutely tender a contract to and look to extend Davis. I don't think he's a non-tender candidate. He might be, but I just get the sense for that kind of value, considering what you saw at center field and, the need for center field, it's going to be interesting. Again, this kind of links into Jazz. Is Jazz going to remain in center field? Does he transition back to the infield? It's going to link to what the Marlins do in the offseason, clearly. But for me, Jonathan Davis, I'm tendering him a deal. He was one of my favorite players at the time. He looked amazing in center field. He was a great clubhouse guy. Low cost to the Marlins here at this point. It seems sensible to at least tender him a deal and give you a bit more wiggle room, let's say, deeper into the offseason. Anthony Bender, we haven't seen for some time, obviously, but working his way back, a big righty with big stuff. I think the Marlins will tender him a deal, less than $1 million on that one. And Jesus Sanchez entering arbitration. Jesus, one of the nicest, surprises, leaps forward. For me, he was a DFA candidate earlier on, but, overall had a productive year. We'd look for him to take another leap, but clearly not a non-tender candidate. That's the main class. Birdie has a team. There's a team option on Birdie that the Marlins, I'm sure, will exercise on that one. So it's a deep class. There's some interesting decisions, I think, over Jacob Stallings. There's some interesting decisions about the future of Tanner Scott. Luis Arias equally. The Marlins will want to extend him, and can they get it done? How do they feel about Jazz Chisholm Jr.? That, again, is a really intriguing one. For me, the names to look out for in terms of activity, excluding Tanner Scott, in terms of maybe non-tendering anyway, Jacob Stallings, JT Chargois, and Stephen O'Kurt. I do think there's probably some trade. If they aren't fully sold on JT Chargois or Stephen O'Kurt, I personally think there is some trade value there. And so for this low cost at this point, you know, tender them the contract, sign them, and then maybe look to trade them down the line if indeed you aren't fully convinced. There is value there, I think. So the Marlins don't have a real need to just straight up non-tender them at this point. Jacob Stallings, I think, is in a different situation. At $3.5-4 million, it's just way too much for the production. Sandy's not going to be there in 24. By the time Sandy's back in 25, Stallings will definitely be gone, in my opinion. But I don't think the Marlins will be tendering Stallings a contract. I don't think they'll trade him either. I think he'll end up being released by the Marlins, and they'll go in a different direction at catcher. Guys, it's been a Sunday episode of Locked On Marlins. Thanks for joining me, Peter Pratt. And of course, we're on normal, regular routine now, guys. No more weddings. So Monday's episode tomorrow, I'll be back, and look forward to seeing you then as we get into more discussion around the Marlins off-season plans. And we'll see you then.